The first time he knew it was over, no officer said the words. No one gathered the men and told them Germany was finished. No one admitted that the maps were lying, that the speeches were empty, or that the front had become a line drawn through mud, smoke, and fear. He understood it on a road in the cold, while men in the same uniform walked past him in the wrong direction. Some had no rifles. Some had no helmets. One man dragged a boot by its laces because his foot was wrapped in cloth. They did not look like soldiers moving to another position. They looked like men who had already heard the truth and no longer had the strength to argue with it. For years afterward, when people asked him when he knew Germany had lost the war, he did not give them a date. He did not say a famous battle name. He did not mention a radio speech, a commander, or the day surrender papers were signed. He spoke of a road, a ruined village, and a line of exhausted men walking west through dirty snow. He spoke of the moment he looked at them and understood something no one in command had dared to say. The war was not turning. It was not waiting for one final miracle. It was already lost. He knew it then, but he knew it too late. This is not the story of a hero. It is not an attempt to make innocence out of a uniform. The soldier in this account is a composite, built from the kind of memories many men carried out of the final months of the war. We will call him Karl. He had been young enough to believe what older men told him, and old enough by 1945 to know what artillery did to a street. He had been taught that discipline was survival, that doubt was weakness, and that Germany could still win if men stopped asking questions. By the time he reached that road, the questions had already begun asking themselves. In the beginning, Karl had believed in the neatness of maps. Maps were clean. Rivers held their shape. Towns sat where they were printed. Lines moved in confident arrows, and arrows made war look like something intelligent men controlled from dry rooms. Nothing on paper showed a wounded horse frozen beside a ditch. Nothing showed soldiers cutting straps from abandoned packs because they had run out of proper bandages. Nothing showed civilians pulling carts through shell holes while boys with rifles stepped around them. A map could say a bridge was open long after the bridge had become twisted metal in a river. Karl learned that slowly and then all at once. That morning, his group had been ordered to hold near the edge of a damaged village. The officer who gave the order pointed to a road junction and called it important. He said the men would wait there until new instructions arrived, then move toward a bridge before nightfall. His voice was hard, but his hands were not. Karl noticed the slight shake when the officer folded the map. It was a small thing, almost nothing. But by then small things had begun to carry more truth than speeches. A shaking hand, a missing supply truck, a field kitchen that never arrived, a clerk burning papers behind a wall and pretending the smoke meant nothing. The village itself seemed to be waiting for something worse. Windows had been blown open. A church bell hung crooked in a cracked tower. In one doorway, a woman had stacked chairs against the wind, though the front wall of the house was gone. Snow had turned gray along the road where boots and tires had crushed it into mud. Karl and the others took positions near a low stone wall, facing east, though no one could say exactly where the enemy was. Behind them, a cart creaked past with two children sitting on top of bedding. One child stared at Karl's rifle as if trying to decide whether it still meant protection. For a long time, Karl had been more afraid of saying the wrong thing than thinking the wrong thing. A man could notice privately if he kept his mouth still. He could notice that the replacements were younger than before. He could notice that the officers used different words for retreat every week. He could notice that letters from home no longer sounded like home because every page carried hunger, bombing, or silence. But noticing was not the same as admitting. Admitting meant the war had entered a place inside him that orders could not reach. It meant the slogans had failed. It meant the dead had not purchased what the living were still being asked to buy. Around midday, the first broken group came down the road from the east. At first, Karl thought they were being moved to another position. Then he saw their pace. They were not marching. They were drifting. One man had tied a strip of cloth around his jaw. Another carried only the wooden stock of a rifle, as if the rest of the weapon had been torn away and he had not noticed. A third man kept both hands slightly raised in front of him, not surrendering, not praying, only trying to keep balance. No officer led them. No vehicle followed them. They passed Karl's wall without asking where to report. A corporal stepped into the road and demanded their unit. No one answered at first. Then an older soldier turned and looked at him with a tired pity that made Carl uncomfortable. The man said there was no unit anymore. The line had broken before dawn. The guns were gone. The Americans were closer than anyone had admitted. There were no new orders behind them, only more roads and more men looking for somewhere to stop running. The corporal called him a coward and told him to keep moving. The older soldier did not argue. He looked down at the corporal's clean map case and said, "Then go and see it yourself." Carl remembered that sentence more than the shelling that followed. Go and see it yourself. It was the first honest order he heard that day. Nobody in command had spoken that way. The newspapers had not spoken that way. The radio reports had not spoken that way. But the road did. The road showed men who had lost their companies, boys asking for field hospitals that no longer existed, and military police standing beside abandoned vehicles with no one left to direct. It showed civilians and soldiers moving together, not because they shared a plan, but because the same fear had finally found them all. By late afternoon, another order arrived. Carl's group was still to move toward the bridge after dark. The bridge, according to command, remained available. That was the word used, available. Not safe, not secured, available. The officer read the paper once, then read it again without speaking. When he looked up, his face seemed to have lost several years and gained several more. He told the men to prepare. Dieter, one of the soldiers near Carl, said the order proved the situation was controlled. He said reserves were coming. He said the Americans would be stopped at the river. He said these things too quickly, like a man trying to outrun his own doubt. Carl wanted to believe him. That was the part he hated remembering. Even then, with the road full of retreating men and smoke rising behind the village, some part of him still wanted someone else to restore the old shape of the world. He wanted the map to become true again. He wanted the officer's voice to become strong enough to hold reality in place. He wanted the next order to explain the last one. But the village kept burning. A cartwheel snapped near the road junction, and two civilians tried to lift it while soldiers walked around them. A wounded man asked for water 3 times before anyone heard him. Reality had stopped waiting for permission. If this history matters to you, a quiet like or subscription helps this channel keep these accounts alive with the care they deserve. The men in these stories were not only uniforms on a map. They were witnesses to what orders, fear, and belief can do when the truth arrives too late. Carl's story does not excuse the side he served. It does not make defeat into innocence. What it shows is colder than that. It shows how a young man can carry a lie until the lie collapses in his own hands and still not know what to do next. At dusk, the road became crowded again. This time it was not only soldiers. Civilians moved west with bundles, bedding, pots, and children wrapped in blankets. A woman pulled a cart with one wheel bent so badly it screamed every few meters. A boy in uniform tried to help an old man push it, then gave up when the artillery began again. Shells landed beyond the village, not close enough to scatter everyone, but close enough to remind them that the road could become a killing ground at any moment. Carl saw a soldier kneel beside a ditch and vomit without removing his helmet. No one stopped. No one had the strength to make another man's fear important. The order to move came after full dark. The men were told to keep intervals, stay off the center of the road when possible, and make no unnecessary light. Those instructions sounded precise, and precision gave them a few minutes of comfort. Carl checked his rifle. He checked the small amount of ammunition he had left. He checked the map tucked into the officer's case, though he could barely see it. Then the column began moving toward the bridge. Boots sank into mud under the thin crust of snow. Somewhere ahead, an engine coughed and died. Men whispered for the line to keep moving, then cursed when it did not. The first jam happened at a bend where a truck had slid sideways across the road. Its rear wheel had broken through the edge of a ditch, and the vehicle sat at an angle with one headlamp shattered. Men pushed at it in the dark, while others tried to squeeze around. Someone shouted that wounded men were inside. Someone else shouted that the truck had to be moved before the next barrage. Carl climbed onto the ditch bank and saw shapes pressed together in the back, blankets, boots, faces turned away from the cold. The men pushed again. The truck shifted only a few inches. Then artillery flashed behind them, and every man near the road dropped low without being told. When the shelling stopped, the column was no longer a column. It had become pieces. Carl found Dieter beside him, breathing hard, his face pale under the mud. The officer was somewhere ahead. The corporal with the clean map case had disappeared behind the truck. Men began calling names, but most calls died after 1 or 2 attempts. The darkness swallowed answers. Carl helped pull one wounded man from the truck and dragged him toward a wall. The man kept asking whether the bridge was close. Carl said yes because it was the only useful lie left to give. The man nodded as if he believed him, though both of them knew distance had stopped meaning very much. Near midnight, Carl found himself beside a ruined building with 3 other soldiers. The road ahead had stalled completely. Vehicles were jammed nose to tail. A mule screamed somewhere in the dark, a thin, terrible sound that rose above the engines and then broke off. In brief artillery flashes, Carl saw the faces around him. Tired, dirty, no longer arranged into expressions that matched orders. One of the soldiers beside him was very young, maybe 16. His helmet sat too low, and his rifle looked too large in his arms. He asked Carl if they were still going to win. He did not ask with hope. He asked because he needed an older man to decide what reality was. That was the second time Carl knew it was over. The first time had been the road full of men walking west. The second was the silence after that boy's question. Carl had no answer left that did not shame him. He could not say yes. He could not say no. He could not explain that victory had become a word men used because the alternative was too heavy to carry. He only told the boy to stay close and keep his head down. It was not courage. It was the smallest useful thing he could offer. Years later, when Carl remembered the boy, he could not remember his name. That failure stayed with him. The bridge was gone before dawn. They did not see it vanish. They arrived after the fact, when the riverbank was already crowded and men stood staring at smoke and twisted metal. Whether retreating engineers had blown it, or artillery had struck it, or panic had finished what planning began, Carl never knew. The result was the same. The crossing they had been ordered to reach existed now only as broken beams, hanging cables, and dark water moving underneath. Men stood on the bank as if looking long enough might rebuild it. One soldier laughed once, a short cracked sound, then sat down in the mud and put his face in his hands. Carl looked at the map again. The bridge was still there. On paper, it remained a route. It connected 2 banks cleanly, as if ink could hold where steel had failed. That image never left him. The bridge alive on the map and dead in front of him. He understood then how long a lie could survive after reality had destroyed it. The paper did not know the bridge was gone. The order did not know. The men who had sent them there might not know, or might know and send them anyway. In that gap between paper and river, Carl felt something inside him give way. Not fear. Something deeper and more humiliating than fear. There was no grand surrender at the river. No white flag rose. No music changed. The war simply became smaller. It shrank to cold hands, empty stomachs, and the distance to the next ditch. Carl and several others moved away from the road before the next shelling began. They left behind things that would once have been unthinkable to abandon. A torn pack, a wet blanket, a metal canister, a field shovel with a cracked handle. Each object felt like a small confession. When men still believe in victory, they carry symbols. When they know the truth, they carry only weight. Carl kept his rifle because fear told him to. He kept the map because he could not make himself throw it away. By morning, scattered men were moving through the trees west of the river. Some searched for another crossing. Some searched for officers. Some searched only for a place where shells were not falling. Dieter was gone. The young boy was gone. The officer was gone. Carl did not know whether any of them had died, been captured, or simply taken another path in the dark. That uncertainty became part of the memory. War did not always give endings. Sometimes it removed people from sight and left the living to imagine every possible fate. Carl remembered stepping over a dropped glove frozen into the mud. For reasons he never understood, that glove troubled him more than the bridge. For the rest of his life, Carl was careful with how he told the story. He did not ask to be pitied. He did not pretend he had been innocent of the system that used him. He did not make himself brave for realizing too late what others had suffered from the beginning. That was the burden of the memory. It gave him no clean place to stand. He had been young, yes. He had been afraid, yes. He had been lied to, yes. But he had also marched under those lies until the lies failed him personally. Years later, that distinction still mattered. Regret was not repair. Memory was not judgment. Understanding was not absolution. When people asked him what the end of the war felt like, they expected one moment. They expected surrender, capture, a shouted order, or the sight of enemy soldiers appearing through smoke. Karl spoke instead of fragments, a road filling with men walking the wrong way, a woman pulling a broken cart, a truck stuck in a ditch with wounded men inside, a boy asking if they were still going to win, a bridge that remained on a map after it had vanished from the world. These were not the great images of history. They were smaller, and that made them harder to escape. History could be explained. The road could only be remembered. The most frightening part of that memory was not that an army lost. Armies lose. Governments fall. Maps change. The frightening part was how long ordinary men could keep moving after the truth had become visible. Karl had seen enough to understand, but he still obeyed for a while longer. He still followed roads marked by men who were no longer standing on them. He still waited for orders from people who had stopped telling the truth. That is why the memory stayed with him. It did not make him special. It made him ordinary in the worst possible way. He learned that war does not only ask men to kill or die. Sometimes it asks them to keep believing after belief has become a crime against reality. If there is a lesson in his story, it is not a soft one. It is not that every soldier is secretly innocent. It is not that fear erases responsibility. It is that lies become most dangerous when they are carried by ordinary hands. A young man can be taught to fear the enemy more than the truth. He can be taught to mistake obedience for honor. He can be taught that doubt is betrayal until doubt becomes the last honest thing left in him. Karl's road was one road among thousands, but the moment on it was real in a larger sense. A man looked around, saw the world his leaders had promised was not there, and finally understood what the war had cost before it reached him. By the time the official end came, Karl no longer needed an announcement. He had already seen the ending in pieces. He had seen it in retreating men, burned villages, silent officers, hungry civilians, broken vehicles, missing friends, and a bridge destroyed before the order could reach it. The surrender only gave a date to something his eyes had already accepted. Decades later, sitting under warm light in a quiet room, he could return to that cold road faster than he wanted. The past did not come back as history. It came back as mud on boots, smoke in the throat, and the shame of understanding too late. And when he reached that part of the memory, he always lowered his eyes before speaking. Because what haunted him was not only that Germany lost. It was that he had needed the road, the burned village, the broken bridge, and the unanswered boy before he could believe what had been in front of him. He had been told the war could still be won. He had repeated that belief until the world itself refused to carry it any longer. Then he saw the men walking west. He saw the bridge gone. He saw the map still pretending. And at last, with no officer brave enough to say it for him, he knew. It was over. It had been over. And he had known it too late.